so today I'm going to show you how I fix socks that have been worn out. And usually you just get a hole or two in the sole of your socks and the ribbing is usually just fine. So what we are going to look at is how to fix a hole like this. We need to mend this. Now, as you can see, well, I hope you can see, you can tell where the stitches are from when you made the socks. So what we're going to do, I'm going to switch hands here. I'm going to knit in, because there's a piece missing here now. It's kind of been worn away completely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a needle and I'm going to start a few rows below where the hole starts. This is the part that's closest to me, to my body. And I will start picking up one side of the stitch on this row. And I'm picking up so that I've got a few stitches, a couple of stitches on the side here and a couple of stitches on the side here of the hole, so that I will be able to cover the entire thing. Okay? Now what we're doing next is we are going to grab our other needle and we are going to grab our yarn. Now I'm not too particular about this, the yarn that I am mending with being the same yarn that I once knitted the socks in, because you know it's underneath, it's on the underside of your foot, so nobody's going to tell anyway. You could use bright pink for this if you want. So I just grab the yarn in my stash and then you start knitting from these stitches. Let me put that one away. And you knit the first row of the stitches that you picked up. Like so. There you have the first row. Now, what we're doing next is we're going to turn our work and we're going to purl back. Just lift the first stitch and you purl back. But when you get to the last stitch, we'll just put that, without knitting it, on the right needle, and we're going to pick up, let me see if I can show you better. So here's the row from which we have picked up stitches, and we're going to pick up another one from the row next to it, but above that stitch, okay? And we're putting back the stitch that we didn't knit, and we purl those two together. Okay? Oh no, it's a bit hard to see. Let's do that again. Okay? We're turning the work, and we have knitted our first two rows here, and the last stitch on the second row we picked up another stitch on the, next to the hole and purled those two together. Pick up the first stitch, just transfer it, and then you knit across until you get to the last stitch, and you just lift that over, and then you use your needle and you pick up a stitch from the row above, and you take back the stitch that you didn't knit and you knit those two together. So what you're doing here, let me put in my hand inside so you can see a bit better. What we're doing here is we are knitting, we're making new material for the part in the middle where the fabric is now missing. And in each side we pick up an additional stitch that we knit or purl together with the last stitch on the needle. Doing that, we are anchoring the new fabric that we're making to the sides of the hole as well. Okay, so let's continue. We're turning, and I'm lifting off the first stitch purlwise, purling all the stitches apart from the last, which I will just transfer to the right hand needle. I will pick up another leg from a stitch on the side of the hole, transfer back the last stitch that I had not knit, and I will purl those two together, like so. And we turn again, just transfer the first stitch, knit all the stitches in the middle except for the last one, transfer that, pick up a new stitch above, on the row above, transfer back the stitch you didn't knit, and you knit those two together. And we will turn, transfer the first one purlwise, purl all the stitches except for the last one, transfer that, pick up another stitch, and you don't have to be too accurate. It doesn't matter if it's in a straight line or anything next to the hole. Just pick up a stitch that's close to it, to the edge. Transfer back and you purl those two together. Okay, let's see what we got this far. Okay, so you can see we are starting to, we're making a building block here when we're fixing this hole. Okay, so we need to do a few more rows before we can cast off at the top. Transfer the first knitwise, knit across, slip the last stitch, pick up a new one on the next row, transfer back the one we didn't knit and knit those two together, turn, transfer the first stitch purlwise, sorry about the noise, and we are purling all the way to the last stitch, transferring that, picking up a stitch next to the hole, transferring back, and purling together the stitch we picked up with the last stitch on the needle to anchor our new fabric to the sock. Okay, lift the first stitch, knit all stitches across except for the last one, transfer it, pick up a stitch, transfer back and knit those two together. And we are going to turn, and we lift the first stitch purlwise, purl all stitches across, transfer the last one, pick up a stitch from the next row, transfer back and purl those two together. Okay, now we are actually at a point where we are covering the whole entire hole, I believe. Let's see how we're doing. There we go. Now we are going to anchor the top part that we have knitted to the sock so that we have a finished repair. Okay, so once we have finished knitting the fabric that we need to cover the hole, we use our second knitting needle to pick up stitches in the sock just above the hole and just above where we finished off our knitting, like so. And you make sure to pick up the same amount of stitches on the back needle as you have on the needle of with the knitting stitches. And now we are going to Kitchener stitch this together. So you need your tapestry needle or needle of choice. And the first thing you're going to do is set up. You are going to put in the needle in the front stitch purlwise, and you pull the thread through, but you leave the stitch on the needle, and then you are going to put the needle through the first stitch on the second needle. Let's see if you can see this. On the second needle, knitwise, and you pull the yarn through. So, okay, now we have our setup round. Now what you do is you put the needle through your first stitch on the front needle, knitwise, you pull the yarn through, and you pull that stitch off the needle. Then put the needle purlwise through the next stitch on the same needle, and you leave that stitch on the needle. Then we go back to work on the back needle, and we put our darning needle purlwise through the first stitch, pull the yarn through, pull the yarn through, and you drop that stitch off the needle. Then you put your needle knitwise through the next stitch, and you leave that stitch on the needle. And now we go back to the front needle, put our darning needle through the first stitch knitwise, and drop that stitch. Can you see what I'm doing? And purlwise through the next stitch, which will remain on the knitting needle. And we work on the back needle. First stitch, darning needle purlwise through that stitch. Got a bit of an end here. And you drop that stitch off that needle, and the darning needle knitwise through the next stitch, and you leave that stitch on the knitting needle. Back to the front, knitwise through the first needle, pull that stitch off the needle, pull the darning needle purlwise through the next stitch, and leave that stitch on the knitting needle. We go back to the needle on the back side. We put our darning needle purlwise through the first stitch. We pull that stitch off the needle and knitwise through the next stitch. Okay. Go back to the front needle. We go knitwise through the first stitch, lift it off the needle, purlwise through the next stitch, go back to the backside needle, purlwise through the first stitch, drop that stitch off the needle, and knitwise through the next stitch. Now there's only 2 stitches left, so we go knitwise through that final stitch, the last needle, and we pull out that needle, and we'll go purlwise through the final stitch on the back needle, like so. So this is what your repair will look like. Now, of course, this will at first feel a bit chunkier than the rest of the sole because you haven't worked on this yet, but it will soften up really quick, and in no time you won't feel that the repair is there at all. So there you go. You can use your favorite socks again. You don't have to throw them away.